The message came at 0347 hours. Earth Standard Time. Every screen on every human ship, every colony, every station in the solar system flickered once, and then displayed the same image. 12 figures sat in a half circle, their forms strange and alien, their eyes cold with the certainty of absolute power. Admiral Yuna was drinking her third cup of coffee when it happened. She was aboard the Unyielding Dawn, humanity's largest battleship, running patrol near the outer planets. The cup froze halfway to her lips as the transmission began. Species 7291 designated humans, the central figure spoke. Its voice was translated into perfect Korean, English, Mandarin, and 100 other languages all at once. The Galactic Council has observed your expansion into territories that belong to the civilized races of this galaxy. You have been judged. You have been found unworthy. You will surrender all colonies beyond your home system within 40 standard cycles. You will hand over all military vessels. You will submit to permanent observation and population control. Failure to comply will result in total extinction. This is not a negotiation. This is your only warning. The transmission ended. Silence filled the bridge of the Unyielding Dawn. Yuna set down her coffee cup very carefully. She was 46 years old. She had served in the fleet for 23 years. She had seen combat against pirates, put down to rebellions, once navigated her ship through an asteroid field while the engines were on fire. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. "Get me Fleet Commander Taiwu," she said quietly. "And someone find out how they hijacked our communications." 3 hours later, Yuna stood in a holographic conference with the highest-ranking officers in the United States Earth Defense Fleet. Commander Taiwu's face filled her screen. He was 62, with gray hair and scars from the Mars Rebellion still visible on his neck. He had been fighting since before Yuna was born. 2 million ships, Taiwu said. His voice was calm, like he was discussing the weather. "That is what our intelligence suggests," the Council commands. 2 million warships from 12 different species, each of which has been traveling the stars for thousands of years before we figured out fire. And we have? Yuna asked, though she already knew the answer. "Maybe 9 if we rush production." Taiwu almost smiled. "I have faced bad odds before, Admiral. But this is something special." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what those numbers meant. This was not a war humanity could win. This was not even a war humanity could survive. On Earth. President Ming-Yi watched the same transmission from her office in Seoul. She was 53, small in stature, with kind eyes that had grown hard during her years in politics. She had been elected on promises of peace and prosperity. Now she faced the greatest threat her species had ever known. Her advisors filled the room, all talking at once. "Surrender," some said. "Negotiate," others argued. "Buy time, run, hide." Ming-Yi raised her hand, and they fell silent. "How long have humans existed?" she asked. No one answered. They did not understand the question. 300,000 years, Ming-Yi said softly. "For 300,000 years, we have walked this earth. We survived ice ages that killed nearly everything else. We survived plagues that wiped out half our population. We survived wars that burned entire continents. We survived the climate collapse that should have ended us 50 years ago. We did not crawl out of caves, learn to speak, build cities, and reach the stars just to kneel before strangers who think we are insects." "Madame President," her defense minister said carefully, "the math is not in our favor. They have 2 million ships. We cannot win this war, and we will lose it standing up," Ming-Yi replied. "Prepare my address to the United Nations." 6 hours after the Council's ultimatum, President Ming-Yi stood before the representatives of every nation on Earth. Billions watched from their homes. Their ships, their distant colonies on frozen moons and burning deserts. "My fellow humans," she began. "You have all seen the message? You know what they want? They want us to surrender. They want us to give up everything we have built. They want us to become slaves in a galaxy that does not believe we deserve to exist." She paused, letting her words settle. I will not pretend this will be easy. I will not lie and say we will certainly win. But I will tell you this. Humanity has never won by having the best odds. We have won by refusing to give up. We have won by being too stubborn, too angry, too in love with life to simply lie down and die. She looked directly into the camera, and it felt like she was looking at every human being alive. So here's my answer to the Galactic Council. Here is humanity's answer. We will not surrender. We will not submit. We will not go quietly into extinction. If you want our worlds, come and take them. If you want our children, you will have to go through every single one of us first. And if you think 12 ancient civilizations are enough to break the species that split the atom and walked on the moon, then you do not know what you are dealing with. The official response was transmitted to the council 1 hour later. It contained only 4 words. Is that all you've got? Across the galaxy, the 12 member species of the Galactic Council received humanity's reply. In their 3,000 years of dominance, no species had ever refused their demands. Not once. The very idea was unthinkable. High Commander Velix, of the Dominar hegemony, was the first to speak. They're insane, he said. They cannot possibly believe they can win. The Lorathi ambassador, an ancient being who had seen 100 wars, shook his head slowly. Perhaps they do not believe they can win, he said. Perhaps they simply do not care. The council voted unanimously. The human problem would be solved with overwhelming force. 50,000 ships would be dispatched to destroy the human colony on Kepler-4 for 2b. It would serve as an example. After watching their fellow humans die, the rest would surely surrender. On the unyielding dawn, Admiral Yuna received word of the approaching fleet. She gathered her officers and shared the news. 50,000 ships heading for Kepler-4 4b, she said. 300 soldiers and 12 frigates defending it. Commander Taiwu nodded slowly. Then we had better make sure those 300 soldiers are ready to give the galaxy something to remember. Yuna smiled for the first time since the ultimatum. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a woman who had accepted that the impossible was now her job. Get me Colonel Yeho, she said. Tell him guests are coming. Colonel Yeho stood on the surface of Kepler-4 4b and watched the sky burn. 50,000 enemy ships were entering orbit. Their shadows blocked out the twin suns. The ground shook as their engines screamed through the atmosphere. He was 41 years old. He had 300 soldiers under his command, 12 frigates that were 20 years old and held together with prayers and spare parts. And behind him, a colony of 40,000 civilians who had nowhere to run. Sir, his second-in-command said, they are demanding our surrender. Yeho did not answer right away. He was looking at the mountains in the distance, where his engineers had been working for the past 3 days. He was thinking about the tunnels beneath the city, where his people had been preparing surprises for their guests. He was remembering what his grandmother had told him when he was a boy. She had survived the climate wars. She had eaten rats to stay alive while the oceans swallowed half of Korea, and she had taught him one lesson that he never forgot when someone bigger than you wants to hurt you, she had said. You do not fight fair. You fight dirty. You fight mean. And you never, ever stop fighting until one of you is dead. Yeho smiled. Tell them we accept their surrender, he said. His second-in-command stared at him. Sir, they will figure out the joke soon enough. Now get everyone to their positions. We are going to welcome our guests properly. High Commander Velix watched the human colony from the bridge of his flagship. He had fought 17 wars in his long life. He had conquered 6 species. He had never lost a battle. This would be simple. 300 soldiers against 50,000 ships. The humans would die, and the rest of their species would learn to fear. Begin the bombardment, he ordered. The first wave of missiles streaked toward the colony. They would turn the city into dust. They would kill everyone in seconds, but the missiles never arrived. Deep in the mountains, human engineers activated gravity generators that had been hidden for 3 days. The missiles curved off course. Some flew into the mountains. Some flew into each other. Some turned around and flew back toward the ships that had launched them. Velix stared at his screen in disbelief. What is happening? Before anyone could answer, the asteroids came. 52 rocks, each the size of a building, had been moved into position over the past week. Now they fell. Not randomly. Not wildly. They fell with perfect aim, guided by pilots who had volunteered to ride them down. 12 of Velix's carriers disappeared in the first 30 seconds. Launch fighters, Velix commanded. Land ground troops. Crush them. 10,000 Dominari warriors descended on Kepler-4 for to be. They were 7 feet tall. They had fought 100 battles. They had never known defeat. They had also never fought humans. Lieutenant Hannah was 28 years old. She was small, even by human standards. She had a scar on her left cheek from a training accident and a smile that made people trust her. She commanded 40 soldiers in the tunnel network beneath the colony. The tunnels had been dug in secret over the past year. They were narrow. They were dark. They were filled with traps that would make any sane person weep. The Dominari entered the tunnels with confidence. They were bigger. They were stronger. They outnumbered the humans 50-1. None of that mattered in the dark. Hannah's soldiers knew every turn, every dead end, every hidden hole in those tunnels. They struck from shadows. They collapsed ceilings on enemy squads. They filled corridors with fire and smoke, and then vanished before the Dominari could react to. 2,000 warriors entered the tunnels on the first day. 300 came out alive. High Commander Velix received the reports with growing horror. His ground forces were being slaughtered. His ships were being picked apart by human frigates that fought like rabid animals. And the humans were not following any military doctrine he had ever seen. On the third day, a human frigate captain named Boy Young flew her damaged ship directly into one of his dreadnoughts. She did not try to escape. She did not try to survive. She accelerated to maximum speed and crashed into his ship's reactor core. The explosion killed 4,000 Dominari soldiers and destroyed 3 nearby vessels. On the 5th day, human colonists armed with mining equipment ambushed a Dominari patrol. They were farmers, teachers, children barely old enough to hold a weapon. They killed 200 warriors before they were finally stopped. On the 7th day, Velix watched as a human pilot ejected from his destroyed fighter, floated toward a Dominari shuttle, and detonated the explosives strapped to his own body. They are insane, Velix whispered. They are all insane. In the tunnels, Lieutenant Hannah was still fighting. She had started with 40 soldiers. Now she had 11. They had been fighting without sleep for 8 days. They had run out of ammunition 2 days ago. They were using knives now, rocks, their bare hands. The Dominari kept coming, and Hannah kept killing them. On the 9th day, relief finally arrived. 300 human ships had broken through the blockade. They scattered the remaining Dominari forces and landed rescue teams on the surface. When they found Hannah, she was sitting in a tunnel surrounded by bodies. 800 Dominari warriors lay dead around her position. She had 7 soldiers left. They were all injured. They were all exhausted. And they were all still holding their weapons, ready to fight. Lieutenant, the rescue commander said softly, "It is over. You won." Hannah looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much death. "We did not win," she said. "We survived." There is a difference. High Commander Velix retreated from Kepler-4 to be with less than half his fleet. 23,000 ships had been destroyed or disabled. 90,000 warriors were dead. Against 300 humans and a colony of farmers, his report to the Galactic Council contained words that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. "Do not fight like any species we have encountered," he wrote. "They do not value their own lives. They use their deaths as weapons. They turn farmers into soldiers and children into killers. They build traps that sacrifice the defender along with the attacker. And when they are cornered, when they have no hope of victory, they fight harder than ever. I do not know how to defeat an enemy that does not fear death. I do not know how to break a species that turns destruction into strategy. I recommend the Council reconsider its approach. These humans are not animals to be slaughtered. They are something far more dangerous. They are survivors. And they will not stop fighting until every single one of them is dead. The Council received his report in stunned silence. For the first time in 3,000 years, they began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. On the unyielding dawn, Admiral Yuna read the same report through intercepted communications. She closed her eyes and thought of the soldiers who had died on Kepler 44 to be. Then she opened them and began planning the next battle. The war was just beginning. Intelligence. Director Doyan had been preparing for this war for 15 years. Most people did not know his name. Most people did not know his department existed. And that was exactly how he wanted it. He sat in a room beneath the mountains of Korea, surrounded by screens that showed him everything happening in the galaxy. He had spies on 40 different worlds. He had informants in the courts of 8 council species. He had been planting seeds of doubt long before the first shot was fired. Now those seeds were beginning to grow. "Show me the Lorthy." "Homeworld," he said. The screen changed to display a planet of endless oceans and floating cities. The Lorthy were ancient beings, philosophers and poets who had traveled the stars for 50,000 years. They had joined the Council not for conquest, but because they believed in order and wisdom. They were not warriors, and they were beginning to question this war. Doyan smiled. He had sent them a gift 3 months ago. A complete archive of human history. Not propaganda. Not lies. Just the truth. All of it. The beauty and the horror. The art and the genocide. The love and the hate. Everything that humanity had ever been. He had gambled that the truth would be more powerful than any weapon. On the Lorethi homeworld, an ancient scholar named the Keeper of Records had spent those 3 months studying the human archive. He had watched recordings of human wars. He had read human poetry. He had seen humans kill each other by the millions and then turn around and create music that made him weep. Now he stood before the Council, his voice trembling with emotion. "We have made a terrible mistake," he said. "We declared war on a species that has spent its entire existence at war. Not with us. With itself? With nature? With extinction itself?" He paused, letting his words settle. They survived ice ages that killed 90% of all life on their planet. They survived diseases that wiped out half their population. They survived weapons that could destroy cities in a single flash. And every single time, they did not merely survive. They came back stronger. The council chambers were silent. "They do not know how to surrender," the keeper continued. "It is not in their nature. When they are pushed to the edge, they do not fall. They push back. And the harder you push, the harder they push back. This is a species that has been fighting for survival since the day they crawled out of the mud. We cannot break them. We can only make them angry." The Dominar representative stood up, his face twisted with rage. "They killed 90,000 of our warriors. They must pay. And how many more will we lose?" The keeper asked quietly. "How many ships? How many soldiers? How many worlds? They have 8,000 ships. We have 2 million. And still, they hurt us. What happens when they have more ships? What happens when they learn our weaknesses? What happens when they stop defending and start attacking?" No one had an answer. Far from the council chambers, Captain Sunwoo was proving the keeper's fears were justified. He commanded 12 ships. Old ships. Small ships. Ships that the council would consider barely worth noticing. But Sunwoo was not interested in fighting battles. He was interested in sending messages. His target was a shipyard in the heart of council space. It built dreadnoughts for the Dominari hegemony. It was protected by 500 warships and was considered impossible to attack. Sunwoo attacked it. Anyway, his ships dropped out of hyperspace in the middle of the shipyard. They did not try to destroy it. They did not try to hold it. They simply caused chaos. They fired at everything. They released electronic viruses that shut down defense systems. They broadcast signals that jammed communications across the entire sector, and while the defenders were confused, Sun Wu's Marines boarded the slave quarters. The shipyard ran on slave labor. 40,000 beings from a dozen different species, captured in wars long forgotten, forced to build weapons for their conquerors. They had no hope. They had no future. They had been told that no one would ever come for them, until the humans came. Sun Wu's soldiers moved through the slave quarters with precision. They broke chains. They opened doors. They gave weapons to those who wanted to fight and guidance to those who wanted to run. In 3 hours, they freed every slave in the facility. Then Sun Wu broadcast a message on every frequency. "This is Captain Sun Wu of the United Earth Defense Fleet. We do not want your territory. We do not want your wealth. We just want to be left alone. But if you keep coming for us, we will come for you. Not to conquer. Not to enslave. Just to remind you that there are things in this galaxy worse than death. And we learned them all in the trenches of Verdun, the ashes of Hiroshima, and the storms of the dying earth." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was soft. "Humanity does not break, but we can be friends. The choice is yours." Then his ships vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind a destroyed shipyard, 40,000 freed slaves. In a galaxy that was beginning to understand what kind of enemy it had created, 3 council species began secret negotiations with Earth within the week. The Lorothy were first. They sent a private message to President Minji, expressing their desire to end the conflict. They did not want to fight anymore. They had seen enough of human history to know how this war would end, not with human extinction. With endless blood and fire that would consume everyone, the Volante followed. They were traders, merchants, who cared more about profit than politics. The war was bad for business. Human raiders were disrupting shipping lanes. Human hackers were stealing financial data. Human spies were everywhere, it seemed, knowing things they should not know, appearing in places they should not be. Even the proud Krethians sent quiet messengers. They were warriors, the mightiest military force in the Council. They respected strength. And they were beginning to respect humanity, but the Dominari would not be swayed. High Commander Velix had lost too many soldiers. His honor demanded revenge, and he had the ear of the Council's most powerful members. "We must strike at Earth itself," he argued. "We must show them that no matter how hard they fight, we can reach their home. We can kill their families. We can burn everything they love. Only then will they understand that surrender is their only option." The Council debated for 3 days. In the end, fear won over wisdom. They would assemble the largest fleet in galactic history. 1 million ships from all 12 civilizations. They would travel to Earth, and they would end the human problem once and for all. When Intelligence Director Doyen learned of the Council's decision, he closed his eyes for a long moment. He had hoped it would not come to this. He had hoped that reason would prevail, but hope, he knew, was not a strategy. He picked up his communicator and called Admiral Yuna. "They are coming," he said. 1 million ships. Target is Earth." There was a long silence on the other end. "Then we will be ready," Yuna replied. Her voice was calm, steady. The voice of a woman who had accepted that the impossible was her job. "Get me everything you have on their fleet composition." "And Doyan, thank you for everything." "Do not thank me yet," Doyan said. "Thank me when we survive." He ended the call and turned back to his screens. Somewhere out there, 1 million ships were preparing to destroy his home, and he had work to do. 1 million ships darkened the stars as they approached the Sol system. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Grand Admiral Vorith of the Krethian Empire stood on his command bridge and felt the weight of destiny on his shoulders. He had been given one order: destroy Earth, end the human species, bring peace to the galaxy. He intended to follow that order. "How long until we reach the system's edge?" he asked. "For hours, Grand Admiral." Varath nodded. "For hours until the end of humanity. For hours until this annoying species was nothing but ash and memory." He almost felt pity for them, almost on Earth. Secretary General Jinho addressed humanity for what many believed would be the last time. He was 70 years old. He had white hair and tired eyes and hands that shook slightly when he raised them. He had been a teacher before he entered politics. He had taught children about history, about the long story of human survival against impossible odds. Now he stood before the entire species and spoke from his heart. "They are coming," he said simply. 1,000,000 ships. The largest fleet this galaxy has ever seen. They are coming to end us, to wipe humanity from existence, to make sure no human child ever laughs again, no human voice ever sings again, no human heart ever beats again. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was stronger. "I will not lie to you. I cannot promise we will win. I cannot promise we will survive. But I can promise you this: we will not go quietly. We will not surrender. We will not beg for mercy from those who have none to give. We will fight. Every man, every woman, every child old enough to hold a weapon. We will fight because that is what humans do. We fight. We survive. We endure. And if this is to be our end, then let us make it an end worthy of our story." His final words echoed across every human settlement in the solar system. "Us show them how humans say goodbye, General." Sora had been preparing for this moment her entire life. She was 63 years old. She had never lost a battle. She had commanded the defense of Mars during the rebellion. She had held the line at Titan when pirates tried to take the fuel stations. She had been fighting since she was 18 years old. Now she faced her greatest challenge. Her strategy was simple: make them pay for every kilometer, turn the entire solar system into a killing field, and never, ever give up. The outer defenses activated as Varath's fleet approached. Jupiter's moons had been converted into weapons platforms over the past month. They opened fire with weapons that had been designed to crack asteroids. Against ships, they were devastating. Varath lost 2,000 vessels before he even entered the system proper. He pushed forward. That was what the plan demanded. Push through the defenses. Accept losses. Reach Earth. Saturn's rings came next. They looked beautiful, those ancient rings of ice and rock. They were also filled with mines. Millions of mines, hidden among the debris, waiting for ships to pass. Another 3,000 vessels died in the rings, Varath continued. His fleet was still massive, still overwhelming. He could afford these losses. Then he reached Mars. The red planet had become a fortress. Its surface was covered with weapon emplacements. Its orbit was filled with defense stations, and its people had no intention of surrendering. General Sora commanded the defense from deep beneath the Martian surface. She watched the enemy approach on her screens and felt a strange calm. "All units," she said, "hold nothing back. Today, we find out what we are made of." The Battle of Mars lasted 3 days. Human ships swarmed the enemy fleet like angry insects. They were smaller, weaker, fewer in number. They did not care. They rammed larger vessels. They flew into engine cores. They died by the thousands, and they took enemies with them every single time. On the surface, human soldiers fought Cretheon warriors in the red dust. Colonel Hunhua led a charge against an enemy landing force with only 200 troops. They were outnumbered 10 to 1. They won anyway, using the low gravity and thin atmosphere to their advantage, striking and vanishing like ghosts. But it was the civilians who broke the enemy's spirit. Farmer Kyun was 70 years old. He had grown food in the Martian greenhouses for 40 years. He had never held a weapon in his life. When the enemy landed near his farm, he climbed into his cargo hauler and flew it directly into a Crethean dreadnought's engine core. His last words, recorded by his ship's computer, were simple. "This is for my grandchildren." Tichinari was 52. She had taught mathematics in the colony schools for 20 years. When the fighting began, she did not run. She organized the other teachers. They set up a communication network that coordinated resistance cells across the planet. They guided soldiers to enemy weak points. They hacked Cretheon systems and fed false information to the enemy commanders. Nari was killed on the second day when a Cretheon strike force found her location. She was still transmitting coordinates when the ceiling collapsed. And then there was Jinwoo. He was 17 years old. Just a kid. He had been studying computer science before the war. He was good at it. Really good. When the enemy fleet entered the system, Jinwoo started hacking their communications. From his basement, with equipment he had built himself from spare parts, it should not have been possible. Council encryption was supposed to be unbreakable, but Jinwoo was not trying to break it. He was tricking it. He sent signals that looked legitimate. He inserted false orders into the command structure. He made ships think they were receiving instructions from their own admirals. 3 carrier. Groups destroyed themselves following Jinwoo's false orders. By the time the enemy realized what was happening, Jinwoo had vanished into another basement. He kept moving. He kept hacking. And he kept killing. Grand Admiral Vorath watched, his fleet being torn apart, and felt something he had not experienced in a very long time. Fear. These humans were not fighting. Like any enemy he had ever faced, they were not following military doctrine. They were not trying to minimize losses. They were simply trying to kill as many of his soldiers as possible before they died, and they were succeeding by the time the fleet reached Earth orbit. 400,000 ships had been destroyed. 400,000. Against a species that had started with 8,000, Vorath stood on his bridge and stared at the blue planet below. It looked so peaceful. So fragile. So easy to destroy. And yet, another wave of human pilots came screaming out of the atmosphere. They were flying old ships, civilian craft, mining vessels held together with tape and prayers, and they flew directly at his flagship, weapons blazing. Not caring if they lived or died, Vorath watched a human pilot, barely visible through the sea. Cockpit windows smile as her ship exploded against his shield. Smile. They are not defending a planet, he whispered. They are defending an idea. And you cannot kill an idea. He turned to his communications officer. Get me the council, he said. Tell them we need to talk. The Battle of Seoul ended not with Earth's destruction, but with something no one had expected. A ceasefire. Vorath had lost too many ships. His soldiers were terrified. His commanders were questioning orders. He could still destroy Earth. He had the firepower. But his fleet would not survive the attempt. And for what? To kill a species that would fight to the last child? To rule over ashes? He ordered the retreat. As his fleet pulled back, the humans did not cheer. They were too exhausted. Too broken. They had lost so much. So many ships? So many soldiers. So many friends. Admiral Yuna stood on the bridge of the unyielding Dawn and watched the enemy leave. Her ship was barely functional. Half her crew was dead. She had been awake for 4 days, but they had not lost Earth. She sat down in her command chair and closed her eyes. We did it, she whispered. Grandmother, we did it. Somewhere on Mars, a 17-year-old hacker emerged from his basement and looked up at the sky. The stars were still there. Earth was still there. Humanity was still there, and they were not done fighting. The weeks after the Battle of Seoul were strange and quiet. Grand. Admiral Vorath had retreated with what remained of his fleet. 60% of the greatest armada ever assembled had been destroyed or disabled. The numbers were impossible to believe. 400,000 ships lost against a species that should have been easy to crush. On the Council homeworlds, the news spread like wildfire. Citizens demanded answers. Politicians scrambled to explain how a species they had dismissed as primitive insects had humiliated the combined might of 12 ancient civilizations. For Council species withdrew from the war within the first week. Their populations refused to send more soldiers to die against beings who did not know the meaning of surrender. Protests erupted in the streets. Governments fell. New leaders rose to power, promising peace. 2 more species followed by the end of the month. The war had revealed cracks in the Council's unity that had been hidden for centuries. Old grudges resurfaced. Old wounds reopened. The alliance that had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years was falling apart And at the center of it all stood humanity. Bloody, broken, but undefeated. Admiral Yuna spent those weeks repairing. What could be repaired and mourning, what could not. The unyielding Dawn had survived, but barely. Half its crew was gone. Her best officers were dead. Friends she had known for decades had been turned to ash in the battle, but she did not have time to grieve. There was too much work to do. The Lorothy want to send an ambassador, her aide reported one morning. They are requesting permission to enter the system. Yuna looked up from her reports. An ambassador? Not a fleet? Just one ship, unarmed. They say they want to apologize. Yuna was silent for a long moment. She had spent months fighting the council. She had watched her friends die. She had ordered attacks that killed tens of thousands of enemy soldiers. And now they wanted to apologize. Let them come, she said finally. But tell them I will be watching. The Lorothy ambassador arrived 3 days later. He was ancient, even by Lorothy's standards. His name was unpronounceable in human languages, so he simply asked to be called the Keeper. He had been a scholar before the war. He had spent his life studying the history of the galaxy. Now he had come to study humans in person. President Minji received him in Seoul. It was a deliberate choice. Not in some grand palace. Not in a military facility. In a simple government building in a city that had survived wars and disasters and rebuilt itself every time. I have studied your history, the Keeper said as they sat across from each other. I thought I understood you. I was wrong, Minji waited for him to continue. We thought you were young, primitive, easy to control. We did not understand that youth means hunger, that struggle means strength, that a species forged in fire does not fear flames. The Keeper lowered his ancient head. We made a terrible mistake, and we paid for it in blood. Your blood. Our blood. So much blood that could have been avoided if we had simply tried to understand instead of conquer. What do you want? Minji asked quietly. Peace, the Keeper said. True peace. Not surrender. Not submission. Partnership. We want to be your friends, President Minji. We want to learn from you. We want to share what we know. We want to explore this vast and beautiful universe together. Instead of fighting over it, it took 3 more weeks of negotiation. But the Lorothy formally withdrew from the council and signed a treaty of friendship with Earth. Other species followed. The Volantai, the traders, saw opportunity in human markets. The peaceful Sundari, who had only joined the council out of fear, welcomed the chance to know a species that had proven fear could be overcome. Even some of the Krethians. The proud warriors who had led the assault on Earth began to change their thinking. Grand Admiral Voroth himself sent a private message to Admiral Yuna. You fought well, he wrote, better than any enemy I have ever faced. I do not know if I respect you or fear you, perhaps both. But I know this. If we ever face a threat from outside this galaxy, I want humans standing beside us, not against us. 6 months after the Battle of Seoul, the Galactic Council reformed. Half its members had left. Half its power had crumbled. But what emerged from the ashes was something new. They called it the Galactic Assembly. And for the first time in history, humanity was invited to join not as a conquered species, but as an equal member. Ambassador Yunbi was chosen to represent Earth. She was 45 years old. She had been a diplomat before the war, working in obscure postings and forgotten negotiations. She was patient. She was wise. And she understood something that many of her colleagues did not. Victory was not enough. They needed peace that would last. They needed to transform enemies into allies. They needed to show the galaxy that humanity could be more than just warriors. Her address to the first session of the Galactic Assembly was broadcast across every inhabited world. Asked if that was all you had, she began, her voice calm and clear. You sent 1 million ships to break us, and we are still here. Not because we are stronger than you, not because we are smarter, but because we refuse to accept that we were beaten. That is what humanity is. A species that does not know when to quit. She paused and looked around the chamber. Thousands of aliens watched her. Some with respect, some with fear, some with curiosity. But we do not want enemies, she continued. We never did. We did not reach for the stars to conquer. We reached because we are curious, because we want to see what is out there, because the universe is vast and beautiful and we want to explore it. So here is humanity's hand extended in peace. We would rather build than destroy. We would rather teach than fight. We would rather be your friends than your enemies. Her voice grew harder. But know this. If anyone ever threatens our home again, our children, our future, we will remind the galaxy why you learned to fear the small blue world at the edge of the spiral arm. We did not survive ice ages and plagues and our own worst impulses just to be erased by those who underestimate us. Push us, and we will push back. Hurt us, and we will hurt you worse. But extend your hand in friendship, and you will find no species more loyal, more creative, more willing to stand beside you against whatever challenges the universe brings. She smiled then, and it was a warm smile, a human smile. The choice is yours. What do you want us to be? The assembly voted unanimously to ratify the Treaty of Soul. Humanity was officially welcomed into the galactic community. Not as conquerors, not as subjects. As partners, in the years that followed, a new saying spread among the spacefaring species of the galaxy. Traders whispered it to each other in distant ports. Soldiers shared it around campfires on alien worlds. Parents told it to their children as a warning and a lesson. Never corner a human. They do not know when they are beaten, and that is precisely when they are most dangerous. But there was another saying, too, a kinder one that spoke not of fear, but of hope. If you want a friend who will never abandon you, find a human. They do not know how to give up on the people they love. Admiral Yuna retired 3 years after the war. She bought a small house on the coast of Korea, not far from where her grandmother had grown up. She planted a garden. She watched the waves. She tried to forget the faces of everyone she had lost. Sometimes late at night, she would look up at the stars and remember the battles, the sacrifices, the impossible odds they had overcome. And she would smile, because up there, among those distant lights, human ships were exploring. Human scientists were discovering. Human children were being born on worlds that had never known a human footprint. They had survived. They had endured. They had proven that the smallest species in the galaxy could stand against the mightiest and refuse to fall. And that, Yuna thought, was worth everything. On the other side of the galaxy, on a world the humans would not discover for another century, a young alien child asked her mother about the strange new species everyone was talking about. What are humans? The child asked. Her mother thought for a moment. They are small, she said, and fragile, and they do not live very long. But they are brave and stubborn, and they never, ever stop fighting for the things they love. They are friends worth having and enemies worth fearing, and they have taught the entire galaxy something important. What is that? The mother smiled. That size does not matter. That age does not matter. That nothing matters except the will to keep going, no matter how hard things get. That is what humans are. And that is why the galaxy will never forget them. The child looked up at the stars and wondered what it would be like to meet a human someday, somewhere out there. A human was wondering the same thing, and the galaxy, for the first time in a very long time, felt full of possibilities.